Thank you so much for coming today. We're honored to be here. My name is Vanessa Neumann. I'm the president and CEO of Asymmetrica, who was fortunate enough, an organization was fortunate enough to get the grant from the Counter-Extremism Project to conduct this research, so we are very grateful. Thank you very much. Daoud on our panel is their Hezbollah analyst representing Counter-Extremism Project, and they've been terrific partners in this project. I'm honored to be speaking here. Some of you, I have quite a few friends in the audience, fellow warriors in the cause of a more democratic, pro-business, pro-free trade, anti-transnational organized crime, warriors for the Western Hemisphere, which is a region that tends to get a lot less attention than other regions like the Middle East. So we're always thrilled when we come together. It's like a little family reunion. And I'm particularly honored to have a panel today that is, I consider a panel of heroes, to be honest. There is no one on this panel I don't deeply respect, and I'm honored that they have turned up. We have Stuart Page, who works on many things, but also with Asymmetrica on several projects, a former assistant secretary in DFAT, and worked on APEC in Peru. You can see the bios, and a veteran of counterterrorism efforts all over the world, definitely a hero. Derek Maltz, who basically caught almost all the bad guys described in my book. Monser Alcázar, Victor Boot, Chapo Guzman, you name a bad guy. Derek's like, I know him, I got him. Former head of the Special Operations Division of DEA. We bonded after an FDD event when I apparently caused some trouble. Who knew? Who knew I was capable of such a thing? Daoud, who knows more about Hezbollah's plans and operations than is probably healthy for anyone, and of the Counter-Extremism Project, and speaks fluent Arabic and Hebrew, and divides his time between here and the Levant, and we'll have some very enlightening comments. And José Luís Stein, who is of Financial Integrity Network, and I was honored to have him on. I emailed Juan Zarate, who's another one of my heroes, and if you've ever read Treasury's War, he'll be your hero too. And I said, these are the guys, these are the ones. They actually, do the recommendations on sanctions. So they're the quiet ones, but lethal, So in terms of illicit financial flows, we have quite the panel. So that's it. I want to somewhat sort of stay out of the way of the events. Just wanted to say thank you very much. And thank you very much, Rep. Rothfus, please, for being here and being our keynote speaker. We're absolutely honored to have you with us. Here, a member of the Subcommittee on Terror and Illicit Finance of the House Financial Services Committee, and on the Judiciary, which makes him a very powerful and interesting man indeed. And I'll give you a more, a better introduction in a second. But thank you very much, sir. And also to Congressman Pittenger, who is our sponsor for this event today. Thank you so much for coming. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Joe Humire, a very old friend of mine who we met doing asymmetric warfare in Guatemala in 2012, right? Training on asymmetric warfare, exactly. I want to be clear on that. What it is and how to combat it, how to do it by learning how to do it. And we've been friends ever since, one of the heroes of the Western Hemisphere here in the US. Thank you very much, Joe.
Good afternoon, and thank you to Vanessa for your kind words. Thank you again to Congressman Rothfus for your leadership on this issue, and everybody here in attendance. I, like Vanessa, see a lot of friends, and very warm to welcome great company as we are here today. Congratulations, by the way, on this report. This report is a tremendous effort. When Vanessa called me, I think it was about a few weeks ago, and she says, I'm going to put together this event I'd like to do at the Congress, and we're going to release this new report. And I'm thinking maybe a 20, 30-page report, typical of what think tanks tend to do in Washington. And she sends me this, 100 this 140-page comprehensive report, which in essence, I think is really sorely needed. Because for anyone that's done any work on illicit finance, counterterrorism, counter-transnational organized crime in the Western Hemisphere, you know about the tri-border area. It's not a secret. It's very well known. It's very well cited. However, there hasn't been a real comprehensive study of the tri-border area since about 2003, believe it or not. After 9/11, the Congress commissioned a study that was published that still is cited to this day. I've cited it in several of my reports. But I think it's overdue that we need another comprehensive study that looks at the region kind of as an area study to look at all the elements that are active in this part of South America. So I just want to be very brief and give a few remarks. Before I ran this think tank, Center for Secure Free Society in Washington, I was in the Marine Corps. I spent 8 years in the Marine Corps. So for those that are in the military, were in the military, work with the military, you might have heard of this military refrain. It's an old military refrain, but I think it's applicable to today, which is that amateurs talk strategy, but professionals talk logistics. Why is that saying held? Because in the military sphere, oftentimes when you go after threat networks, it's not so much the strategic overview of how you're looking at a particular threat, but it's the logistical networks that you have to understand of how to dismantle that threat. When you talk about logistical networks, the illicit financial flows is the bloodstream of those logistics. And in that sense, this convergence of transnational criminal organizations and international terrorist organizations that at once was debated within the defense intelligence community has become a threat that cuts across all society, not just in the United States, but throughout the world. And it really hits everybody. The government is obviously tackling this threat because it's trying to preserve and maintain the rule of law. The business community needs to tackle this threat because it hurts the bottom line. It literally takes money out of your companies. And also civil society. Civil society has to look at this threat because at the end of the day, if criminal organizations and terrorist organizations become to gain additional influence and leverage over society, they change the incentives of that country or that society, and they move it more towards predation that moves faster in often cases than production. In that sense, when you look at this convergence of criminal and terrorist organizations, Hezbollah is really the gold standard. It is the one organization, both on the foreign terrorist organization list designated as terrorist by the United States, but also for anyone that's done any work in Latin America on counter-transnational organized crime, can look at it as a tremendous organized crime element throughout the world. And who anyone that's looked at Hezbollah in Latin America, you've undoubtedly come across the tri-border area. And so I just want to give a quick little anecdote of my time in the military. And I often get asked, I've been looking at Iran, Hezbollah networks in Latin America for about a decade now. And I often get asked, how did I get into this, right? How did I begin this? And the truth is, academically, writing, studying, I didn't start till about 2010, where I did, my first trip actually was to the tri-border area. Mm-hmm. But since then, before then, I'm sorry, in my time in the military, I spent some time in Iraq. I had 2 deployments in Iraq. Some of that was to Akut and Najaf. So for those who are familiar, those are very Shia-controlled areas where the Iranians, the IRGC was operating. So I got a kind of a tutorial on the Iranian networks and how they operate. But more later, in 2004, I took part in a military multinational exercise called UNITAS. For those familiar with that, that's a circumnavigation throughout South America, where we do a lot of bilats with different foreign militaries. In this case, in 2004, they combined some of that into Peru, where we did basically had about 12 countries and militaries from throughout South America participating in this exercise. Because I was in the S2 shop, the intelligence shop, I took a trip to the southern part of Peru, which is called Tacna. Another tri-border area, actually, southern Peru, northern Chile, and southwestern Bolivia. We looked at the Tacna because we were getting reports of Islamist elements operating through a mosque down there, which is called the Babu Islam Mosque. The mosque was run by a network of Pakistanis, so we thought perhaps maybe Al-Qaeda. We might have to look at the Sunni Salafist networks that were operating. And so we took a visit down there and went with some of our counterparts from Peru and other neighboring countries, and quickly learned that it wasn't Al-Qaeda, it was Hezbollah. Even though it wasn't Lebanese, even though it wasn't Shia, it was Hezbollah using illicit finance through a port in Arica, northern Chile, that were moving money out of a used car sales racket that was basically sending, shipping illicit proceeds to Lebanon on behalf of these mosques in South America. This is in 2004. So this is not a new conversation. This is something that's been going on for a very, very long time. But I think it's high time that we get the conversation to the right place, in here at the U.S. Congress. And again, the Financial Services Committee, the Judiciary Committee, the Foreign Affairs Committee, leadership of congressmen such as Robert Pittenger, Keith Rothfus, who have been doing tremendous work at bringing this to the attention of the entire Congress, I think is sorely needed. So with that, I'll conclude, and thank you, Vanessa, once again for putting this together.
Thank you, Joe. And with that, I'd just like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Representative Keith Rothfus. Again, thank you for hosting this. Mr. Rothfus, as I said, is from Pennsylvania's 12th district, an area that's suffering a very bad opioid crisis, so knows a thing or two about illicit drug networks, seeing it written on the, unfortunately, literally on the bodies of his constituents, and a great supporter also of Veterans Affairs. You sit on a board of a charity for veterans, and I know we have quite a few veterans in the room. And he has been a leader in this, in our battle against illicit trade and illicit finance. So without further ado, I would like to also say a thank you. I know we have ambassadors, representatives from the various embassies of the countries of the tri-border area. I believe all of them here today, certainly Argentina and Paraguay, and I believe also Brazil somewhere. And thank you for coming and for hearing us, and we are open to discussion and further conversation. And my last admin point is any members of the press who wish to ask questions or interview either any panelists or Rep. Rothfus, please assemble a little, sort of in this area by the podium when the panel discussion is done. Thank you very much. And with that, please, sir, we welcome your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Dr. Neumann. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. It's good to see people who are concerned about what we've been seeing going on, not only in Latin America, but across the world. A special thanks to Asymmetrica and to the Counter-Extremism Project. This is vital work that we have to continue to shine a light on what's going on and look for solutions. I am Keith Rothfus. I represent Pennsylvania's 12th Congressional District. This is a suburban to rural district outside of Pittsburgh. I sit on both the House Judiciary Committee and the Financial Services Committee. Specifically, I'm on the Terrorism and Illicit Finance Subcommittee in Financial Services, as well as the Crime and Terrorism Subcommittee on Judiciary. So there's a great crossover between the issues that we are looking at. My work on both committees covers transnational criminal organizations, or TCOs, foreign terrorist organizations, or FTOs, threat finance, and the convergence between TCOs and FTOs. These organizations engage in various types of illicit activity to generate revenue. And money laundering is how these organizations conceal and move their money around the globe. The amounts being laundered annually are simply staggering, and so are the size of their networks. At a recent hearing last week with acting DEA Administrator Robert Patterson, I asked him about concerns regarding the growing overlap between the cartels and TCOs. He noted his concern and said, quote, "The world has gotten very small for these organizations." One of those organizations is Hezbollah, and it has both FTO and TCO elements in its operations. We know from various media reports and open source materials that Hezbollah developed extremely lucrative criminal enterprises and networks, especially in Central and South America. The recent news headlines about Iran's terrorist proxy cover their hostile and destabilizing actions throughout the Middle East, especially towards Israel. But I am encouraged that this event today will consider other parts of their global operations in South America's tri-border region. The tri-border region has been concerning for a long time with nefarious connections to terrorist groups and TCOs, but the region's connections to Hezbollah have become especially worrisome. Reportedly, Hezbollah's illicit trade activities are now measured in the hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. Over the last decade, Hezbollah even transformed into a major global narcotics trafficker, Without a doubt, a significant portion of the proceeds from their illicit activity are used to finance global terrorist operations. A shocking piece last December revealed some of, and this was in Politico, revealed some of Hezbollah's illicit operations and how the Obama administration purposely ignored it. Think about that. You know, what I read in that Politico article was very troubling. As Dr. Neumann talked about the epidemic we have in Western Pennsylvania and throughout this country. The idea that you have these Mexican cartels dumping their poison into our country, slaughtering people on the Mexican side of the border. 130,000 people, I think, have been slaughtered by the cartels over the last 10 years. And then you look at the tens of thousands of people in our country who are dying as a result of the epidemic. You know, all the heroin, virtually all the heroin we have in this country is coming because of the cartels. And to think that Hezbollah actually had a relationship with them, I think that they mentioned Las Vegas specifically. You know, Hezbollah getting together with the cartels is evil meeting evil, and it needs to be confronted. The U.S. government is finally waking up to the worldwide threat that Hezbollah represents. The report, this report that we're talking about today, and events like this will help the rest of the world wake up as well. In January, the Department of Justice created the Hezbollah Financing and Narco-Terrorism Team, which was tasked with investigating Hezbollah's networks and prosecuting affiliated persons where appropriate. Furthermore, the Terrorism and Illicit Finance Subcommittee held a hearing on the subject of TCOs this past March. I am hopeful that other congressional committees will follow suit, especially as it relates to the tri-border region. As Hezbollah remains involved in a wide variety of illicit trade practices, the tri-border region will likely continue to play an important role for many TCOs, Hezbollah, and most likely a few state actors as well. So it is up to the United States, the international community, and our Central and South American counterparts to do something about it. Again, it's good to be with you here today and to learn of the tremendous work that you're doing. Thank you, Dr. Neumann.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. Thank you for those opening comments. Without further ado, I think I'm going to open up the panel. So, Mr. Stuart Page, my fellow co-author on the report, would you care to present your key findings and specifically as they relate to convergent threats or cooperation, collusion, as Rep. Rothfus just referred to? Did we find that in our report? And if so, what facilitates it?
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and Congressman Rothfus, your words were very important, extremely important. When you said the convergence of TCOs to FTOs, it is here and it's got larger and bigger. The tri-border area has been an area that has been known for a while, but this cluster of fusion of crime has grown even larger, and international action has to happen on this. The blockchain of crime is very interesting in today's world. We live in an interesting world with complex problems where we're more connected, more so ever than before, both politics, security, economic frameworks that connect us and socially. And what we have found in the tri-border area is we have found something that is extremely worrisome, not only for those countries, and don't get me wrong, those countries are working hard, but this is a big problem. And we're talking about millions turned to billions. The proceeds of crime that are coming through the fusion center of a mini-state working the tri-border area is staggering and is of concern. And we need to stop this. We need to be able to look and assist these countries in an international effort to stop $43 billion being laundered. Does anybody in this room know where those proceeds of crime go to? It's staggering. What it's feeding into? The shopping mall that can be of illicit crime that exists in the TBA area is staggering. It is a very difficult problem down there, and I'll tell you why. We know of money laundering centers around the world, but this one represents 3 countries. It's not very often that you come across a fusion center of well-groomed crime that goes back into politicians, law enforcement, porous frameworks of legislation in a complex area, creating our own mini-state and having the proceeds of crime going where we don't know where it's going. And it's something that we need to nip in the bud, like a hydra, cut this head off before it comes domestic and affects. I'm sure. This is not only a terrorist financing, this is an economic stabilization. We need to be able to create stable economies that create stable security frameworks within the region. And so what we found is that implicated in this were law enforcement, politicians, and a capacity to try and cut this off was too big. There are, don't get me wrong, within Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay, there are decent people working very hard on this problem, but they are putting their hand up. What we found on the ground was staggering. They say it is immersed in a decade in a framework of corruption that has become the norm. And the Fusion Center operates there, fueling it could fuel any terrorist group. You can get any cartel can go there, you can get whatever you like. You can be trained up, you can be hidden, you can get arms, you can substitute to opioids, you can do a lot of things that are there. What we found is that we need to be able to stop this $43 billion cluster that's sitting to the south of us before it gets out of control, because it's becoming a soft spot. But it's not just the problem of 3 countries, it's an international community problem. It is what the Financial Action Task Force are doing along with other international community, along with the US government in trying to finalize this. And the depth of the problem has gone too far. And that's where it's gone into the political level. And when it goes into political level and senior levels of the law enforcement, and it's become the norm for over a decade, and we know this has been going, we reached a sum of $43 billion. I don't think today that we can just stop and say nothing can't be done. I think it's a community action. I think there are European specialists, American specialists that can help bring this to bear. The terrorism finance has to stop. The proceeds of crime has to stop. The illicit trade of smuggling from electronics, pharmaceuticals, the cigarettes, all become part of a diversion of a crime center that is sophisticated and well run. And it's extremely well run. It's probably more well run than some countries in some places, unfortunately. But we can't ignore this. And it requires action, and it requires where we all come to the table together to work this. And we're more than happy to assist this process in any way we can, because having a center that has grown to becoming the largest money laundering center in the world and ever growing and not put check creates a blockchain of crime that fuels anything from terrorism to further drugs to a whole range of things. So I'm very confident what I've heard from the congressman today is that he's identified it, he knows his colleagues identified it, here we understand there are law enforcement people. Now we just need to have a call to arms to help these countries who I know are battling very large problems in themselves to actually, let's cut the head of this hydra off before it's too late. I don't want to have to come back here in a couple of years' time and say, look what's happened. Because since 2005 and the last, as Joe said, we knew it was a bad, bad problem there. And I'll tell you what, it's an even worse problem now, and it's become the perfect storm of crime. So on that mark, I'll hand to my esteemed expert, who is a man that's been at the forefront of finding these bad people.
Yeah.
Derek.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Neumann, for inviting me here today to talk to everybody about this issue that's near and dear to my heart. Thank you to the Congressman for some of those words, because it really hit home to me. So we're all trying to make America a better place, a safer place, right? That's what we say all the time. We want to make everyone aware of the issues, but everyone's aware of the issues. I think the people in this room are aware of the issues. Now, where's the action? That's my whole thing. Where's the action? Where's the accountability? I retired from DEA in 2014, but I remain very engaged every single day of the week with my colleagues in multiple agencies, not just the DEA, Like this week, there was a big press announcement out of Paraguay on the big network of couriers that they took down. There was a whole raid. George Ramos and a bunch of these guys are sending lots of cocaine into the Middle East and to Africa, and they're all part of working with Ali Shames, the guy who was extradited back to Miami last year. But the point is that the agents and law enforcement are out there, they're trying to do the best, but this is a much bigger problem, right? I wish these threats were going down, but they're not. They're growing. Everyone said that. The congressman said where evil meets evil, right? But when are we going to meet this? When are we going to deal with this? When are we going to stop talking about it? I'm sick of coming to these conferences and talking. I like to talk. I'm from New York. I could talk all day, but I hate talking about this topic. I have kids. We all have kids, friends, and all that stuff, and we see what's going on. The 241 brave DOD warriors that were blown up in the barracks back in Beirut, we forget about that stuff, okay? That's unfortunate. The bombings in Argentina in 1992, right? The terrorists are here now in the Western Hemisphere. So wake up. Congress, wake up. Law enforcement leadership, wake up. You take the responsibility to be the Homeland Security Secretary or the Attorney General. This is serious business, right? Why do we have to always debate like the numbers? Somebody's going to attack this report and say, it wasn't 43 billion, it was like 4 billion or 2 billion. That's fine, because I have no idea where they get these numbers, and I don't really care. What I know is there's millions and millions of bad guys' money moving through these accounts and moving around the world to help fund the agenda of the terrorists. So that's all I need to know. The Obama administration talked about that Hezbollah was one of the most technically capable terrorists in the world. Where the hell was the sense of urgency? The congressman pointed out the Hezbollah. I know that. I lived it. I watched it. And by the way, on that note, put yourself in my shoes, okay? I didn't know anything about Hezbollah. I'm not a terrorist expert, okay? I'm a law enforcement guy. My father was in law enforcement. My brother was in the Air Force, but he died in Afghanistan fighting for the country. But here's what I know. I know that one of the best admirals in the military, James Stavridis, handed me a fireball slide in 2007 and said, this is the slide, this is my vision of narco-terrorists and Islamic terrorists coming together. This is my worst nightmare. When Eric Holder came to see me at SOD back in 2009, that's what I told him, what keeps me up at night, because I have young kids. Okay, this is really bad. But then you hear Michael Chertoff says, they make Al-Qaeda look like the minor leagues. And we sit there, we laugh, we joke about it. It just keeps growing. It's like a snowball that just keeps growing, right? But the consequences of ignoring this are so severe, we just don't know it, right? They're here in our backyards. They're crossing over the border every day. We just don't know where they are. And then when something happens, people are going to say, how did that happen? Because you've been sleeping all these years and no one's holding anyone accountable. So Congress, let's go. Step it up. I'm here to help you. Human smuggling, cigarette trafficking, counterfeit products, drugs, weapons, it's massive. It's so complex, it's hard to actually keep track of. So basically, you know, SOD had a role of trying to synchronize the efforts of the multiple agencies. We had 3 countries there as well, Australia, the Canadians, and the Brits, and we also brought NYPD in. The problem was, whenever this stuff converges, like the congressman said perfectly, FTOs and TCOs converge. But our agencies don't converge. How about that? When is somebody going to ask that question to Mr. Wray, Chris Wray? If terrorists are turning to crime and criminal networks for funding, why the hell don't our terrorist investigators talk to our law enforcement investigators? What is the answer? Congressman, please write that down and ask him, because I'd like to be there for his answer. Okay? Look at the Boston bombing, catastrophic failure of information sharing because of that, and we can talk all day about that off record. Anyway, over the years, we've seen this nexus growing. My last congressional testimony, I took out on Google a 1985 hearing in Congress where they talked about drug trafficking and terrorism were dangerous mix. Are you kidding me? 32 years ago, we're talking about the same stuff today. This is insanity. So we have a great strategy for TOC. Obama's people wrote it. We all participated in the interagency. You could wipe you-know-what with it because no one acted on it. Where's the operational implementation plan and who's held responsible every week for results? No one. So now Jeff Sessions, thank God, he announced this Hezbollah task force. So I'm anxiously waiting for results. I know the man in charge, John Cronin. He's a very solid prosecutor. And on that note, I will tell you that in 2010 in Southern District of New York, the U.S. attorney there, first one ever, knocked the walls down between drugs and terrorism because he recognized there's no reason for us to have a drug unit and a terrorism unit We need the best and brightest of our government going after these threats. And that's the same thing we need on this whole Hezbollah global threat. And I could go on and on and on. I'm not going to take up more time because Vanessa's staring at me. I could feel the eyes looking at me.
I'll come back to you with more
It's
questions.
okay. But the thing is don't forget the Quds forces were already here. They went to our DEA informant in 2012 and said, yeah, we want to blow somebody up in D.C. We want to blow up embassies. We want to blow these people up. They were willing to pay a lot of money. Thank God the DEA and FBI worked together. We shared information on that event, and the guy's in jail. And everyone said, oh, my God, the Quds forces are in the Western Hemisphere. They've been here in the TBA and in Venezuela. Wake up, okay? And I don't mean to be a jerk with that stuff, but remember, I sat for 10 years in this interagency environment. When I got there were 9 agencies. I built it up to 30 because I have a lot of passion for national security, public safety. But when I see inaction, I get very upset. And I get very passionate and loud. And I apologize. Maybe I get a little bit over the top. It's okay, because my brother Mike is by my heart, okay? I had to bury him in this global war. So thank you very much, and I'll be here for any questions.
Thank you so much, Derek, for your service. David, over to you.
Thank you.
Inform us more.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you to my co-panelists for being here. Thank you, Congressman, for your remarks. So what I'm going to do here is to try to show the parallels between what Hezbollah is doing in Lebanon and what's going on in the TBA, and how this, as you know, Derek just mentioned, this problem is growing. It's not receding, and how they're structuring their activities there actually feeds into that. So the first thing I'd like to mention, I worked on this actually with a former colleague of mine, Emanuele Ottolenghi, who's in the audience at FTD. When I started looking into this, what I noticed was a big parallel between the situation in the TBA and in Lebanon. You have a weak central government, weak law enforcement. You have an area of the country that is kind of detached from the, is peripheral, detached from the center. You have a supportive community. The community, the Lebanese Shia community has been there for years, since the 1980s. Hezbollah moved into the TBA somewhere around that same time. You have a marriage of crime families. They may not necessarily be Hezbollah ideologues, but they're involved in crime. They may be Lebanese, they may be otherwise, and they're working with Hezbollah. You have the same thing in the Bekaa Valley. You have, marijuana and other drug growers in the Bekaa Valley who are part of these family clans, and they're established there, and rather than challenge them or take over their business, Hezbollah works with them and co-opts them. And you have supportive communities across the border. In the Middle East, specifically vis-a-vis the Israelis, you have the Israeli Arab community and the Palestinian community in Israel that act not only to bring Hezbollah drugs into Israel, but also Hezbollah also uses that as a means to gather intelligence and collect information and recruit and pass on funds to recruits and associates in the West Bank and in Israel. The other thing I noticed is that they're not just focused on crime in the TBA. They're focused on building a social structure. This includes everything from mosques, with community activities, with scouts, with festivals, and this is all put in the framework of promoting Lebanese culture. Right? In Lebanon, their scouts are called the Mehdi Scouts. In South America, they're much more innocuously named, or at least not as sectarian. They don't have as a sectarian of a name. You'll have immigrants, as any immigrant community wants. They want to pass on their culture to the next generation. Well, Hezbollah has a ready-made and a ready-set structure to take in the next generation, to maintain that community, and to co-opt them for their own needs. Why is that? Are they just trying to, have get-togethers and eat Lebanese food? No. If Hezbollah were to exist without a community base in the TBA, it would be a terror group or a crime organization, and that lacks permanence. When you have a community, that creates permanence. That means that you are not going to be there for just the lifespan of the individuals who are carrying out the crime. You have recruits for the future. You also have charity and funds. This is a fundraising means. The other part of it, there's a lot of focus in this report elsewhere on Hezbollah's illicit activities. What it doesn't focus on is Hezbollah's vast licit activities as well. In Lebanon, they run organizations that, they run pharmacies, they run restaurants, they run tiling stores. In the end, these are otherwise legitimate business activities. They have investments, but every dollar that goes into them is funneled into the same place. Eventually, it ends up in the hands of, in terms of weapons procurement, recruitment, training. So this all goes into the same place. The last peg of it, one thing we also noticed when Emanuele and I were working on this, was that a lot of the people who are showing up in the community there, some of them are ending up in Syria. Is this acting as a recruitment and funneling center directly for Hezbollah's military activities? It would appear so. So this is a problem that must be tackled, not just because of crime, but because this is directly feeding into expanding Hezbollah's global footprint. And one thing I would like to emphasize that Hezbollah itself says, there's a perception that, Hezbollah, or their main enemy are the Israelis. That's not true. Hezbollah has said this from the outset, that their primary enemy is the United States. And we should treat them as such, we should consider them such, and we should act against them as such.
Thank you so much for that. So, and now let's hear from the American sanctions guy on illicit financial flows. So there's a rather good line in Treasury's War that says that terrorist finance is almost the inverse process of money laundering, right? One's taking dirty money, cleaning it, the other's taking clean money and making it dirty. So over to you.
No, yeah, thanks so much, Vanessa, for the invitation. It's a true honor to be in this important building. Mr. Maltz, you're a great speaker, and I share your admiration for Admiral James Stavridis. Unfortunately, I didn't write the book you're referring to. It was Juan, who's the president of Financial Integrity Network, the firm for which I work for. And I don't recall that specific reference, but I did read the report, and I find it very interesting, and would like to make some comments in that regard. The report presented by Asymmetrica and the Counter-Extremism Project is of great relevance, as others have already noted. Although the risk of having terrorism being financed with illicit proceeds from the tri-border area has been long discussed, this report brings a comprehensive and updated view. It can help to renew discussions and take targeted actions for addressing this important issue. The report describes the TBA as a regional crime fusion center that enables the coexistence of a number of TCOs focused on a diversity of crimes, including illicit trade in tobacco and counterfeit goods, as well as drug and human trafficking. The report also explains that some of the members from the Lebanese community that are involved with criminal organizations in the region keep strong ties with the Lebanese Hezbollah. The situation, the access to funds by organized crime with interest to financing terrorism, is obviously the main concern to the US and many other countries. The report clearly states in page 59 the following: the TBA is well on its way to posing significant risks not only to the three countries it touches, but the world. Not just Hezbollah, but all terrorist and criminal groups and kleptocrats can come to the TBA to launder their money and fund their activities anywhere else in the world. How can this situation be addressed? Terrorist financing and money laundering risks in the TBA must be dealt with a holistic approach. Several measures need to be taken. I would like to mention a few. Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay must work closer together to address these risks. From what is stated in the report, it is concerning to learn that some authorities are not taking ownership of the challenges under discussion. They don't seem to recognize their responsibility and blame their counterparts instead. This path can only lead to failure. There has to be a strong commitment to the President's level to deal with this issue. Second, the TBA countries should focus their attention on effective measures. For example, these countries can form a working group to develop a joint TBA risk assessment. The foundation to addressing these and any other risks in the world requires of a deep and clear understanding of which is the situation. So a risk assessment needs to be carried out which identifies and analyzes the most relevant threats and vulnerabilities in the region. The assessment should nurture from different sources, including the report we're discussing today, to provide a complete diagnosis of the current state of affairs. Important efforts are already being undertaken towards this direction. In particular, Argentina is at this moment carrying out its own national risk assessment, specifically focused on terrorist financing. This is a recommendation from the FATF that countries should carry out national risk assessments. However, it is important to highlight that Argentina is perhaps the first country after the US that decided to carry out this assessment specifically focused on terrorist financing as opposed to blended with the money laundering analysis. It is important because most countries that do not feel that terrorist financing is near them focus in these reports mostly on the money laundering side and barely address the terrorist financing side. Argentina in this case is directly, comprehensively addressing the terrorist financing concerns. Another example is that these three countries, together with the US, have renovated an effort to understand the specific risk to the tri-border area and have been carrying out missions to the area and sharing information. I don't know if there's going to be a public report on this. I hope there will. Mm-hmm. Based on the results from a joint tri-border area risk assessment, the countries have also got to develop a strategic action plan that can help address and mitigate the risks that have been identified. Such an action plan should include policy, regulatory, and operational measures with a short, medium, and long-term vision with responsible parties. Third, provided the matter is urgent, we cannot wait to carry out this risk assessment or have the responsible countries carry out this risk assessment and start developing a strategic plan. This might take months, if not years. So there have to be immediate tactical measures. This could include task forces or a task force that identifies jointly the most relevant typologies of how money is being laundered in the region and how can it be directed towards financing terrorism. And there have to be also coordinated investigations and prosecutions. Other countries, such as the US and Mexico, have been successful in this regard, and they could share their experience. Now, the US can also assert additional direct pressure through its economic sanctions program. OFAC has designated criminals from the TBA before. The report refers in particular to the Barakat network, which was linked to the 1994 AMIA bombing in Argentina. However, other than that, there's only been one OFAC designation related to TBA and the Lebanese Hezbollah in that region, and that was back in 2010 with the designation of Biblal Mohsen Wehbe. So if the US, apart from providing assistance to these countries in how to approach the risk, decides to also take direct action, it has the tools for doing so, and that would be important.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm keen to get fairly soon to questions, but I'd like to use my prerogative here as chair and ask to pick up the thread and move forward the conversation. We were talking about ways in which we might work together. So, Stuart, we had discussed along the way sort of what are the opportunities that are particularly either happening this year, and then I would like to get comments from also, Derek and José Luís, that we identified certain opportunities this year that the leaders of the different countries might move forward toward a solution. What is your view and your analysis of that?
Well, I think the first thing is we all agree it's a problem, and we know it's a problem that it's out of hand at the moment. So I think a series of workshops that bring in the international community with experts are needed. People, we all got to, this is all of our problem. So I think, you know, when you look at the experts in the US government, the British government who are represented here today, a range of the Interpol, Europol, a range of other people, we need to come together to sort those solutions. What is the best path for this? This will not be solved overnight. This has been around a long time, and I think through these series of workshops where we bring all the experts together, Financial Action Task Force, a range of people, and we start to actually nut out the solution. Let's get to the action point. The action point can only have on an open discussion and transparent discussion. We've identified the problem, so that's out the way. Let's see how we're going to solve this. You know, this is not going to be an easy process. I think the other thing is there is an economic imperative that sits on top of this. The dark economy is the black economy that fuels a lot of loss of tax revenue. That money is not going back into law enforcement, capacity building, infrastructure, schools, hospitals, a range of things. The economic imperative. Therefore, we need to also apply sanctions around this. You know, we need to stipulate if we're going to help on foreign direct investments, both public, private, volumes through the IMF and a range of things, we have to bring that with caveats. We actually have to have them to come half the way on the problem to self-heal. You know, I mean, I'm sure they understand these problems and they're no better than that. They've been living with it for a long time. So the economic part of this is very essential. Economic stability also helps government stabilise crime, puts more money back into law enforcement, but they can't do it alone. So that's the other thing. The other thing is, when you go through this, we're talking about corruption with people of trust. That ranges from law enforcement, to customs people, to a range of politicians. I'm not saying they're all, but there has to be anti-corruption initiatives. No country in the world is immune.
So
We all have that.
do the elections coming up now or that just happened, do they present opportunities for Paraguay or Brazil or anti-corruption opportunities? Are you optimistic about that?
I'm very optimistic. I think once we understand we have a problem, we fix it. We have, in Paraguay, we've just had a new change of government. This is a chance for rule of law, anti-corruption initiatives, in which every country around the world signs up to United Nations Action Against Corruption. One of the few instrument treaties in the world where we all sign up. Paraguay is a member of that. Brazil is a member of that. Argentina is a member of that. These initiatives can actually come through in a new government reform. And you know, this is not about the government officials. This is about helping the citizens of these countries.
I'd like to hear a bit more, specifically from Derek and José Luís, about how such a joint task force, how would you fix it, Derek?
Okay, so this is another topic. I get my blood pressure going because here's why.
We'll give you a glass of water.
You ever hear that saying, like, don't throw stones when you live in glass houses, right? So we're criticizing other countries and we don't even have our act together here. So as an example, after 9/11, a lot of people don't know this. After 9/11, the Attorney General, the DEA administrator, and the head of the FBI decided that because drugs and terrorism are so connected, interconnected, and it was a dangerous mix. That's the exact term that's used in the testimony. I obsess on these things if you haven't figured it out. And basically, they formed what they call the Special Coordination Unit at the Special Operations Division back in the day in 2002. And the reason they did that is because they saw all these overlaps between crime and terror, so we had to have a task force arrangement at that time. Well, when I got there and I saw this thing just growing through the roof, we had to actually get more resources, which thanks to Congress and others, DOD, they provided, you know, global war on terror money to us, and we formulated what we call the Counter-Narco-Terrorism Operations Center, which is within SOD right down the road in Virginia. But here's the point. So we have all the interagencies coming together. So in the Project Cassandra thing that was very well publicized, one of the things that was fascinating to me is how well it worked with Treasury, as an example. They brought these powerful tools to the toolbox, from the toolbox that I didn't even know about. But that's how we were able to crush these bad guys' ability to move their money. It wasn't a DEA thing. It was Treasury actions, right, with these experts. And so what I'm trying to say is that, so you have these task force arrangements already set up, but what's missing is the accountability. So what do we do in this country? is we build new centers. Hey, let's build another center because we want to coordinate gangs or we want to coordinate guns or whatever. No, it's all interconnected. We all know it. So why don't we look at the centers that are already working, see what we could do to enhance them, get the resources where everybody's important. See, one of the things in the Beltway, as you all know, right, is SOD is kind of like, well, DEA runs that thing. We don't want to participate. Why not? You got kids at home, right? So if a bomb goes off in the metro and it's kind of like a biological weapon, we're all impacted, right? So this mentality is got to be changed. And the only way that's going to change is from folks like you, Congressman, that can actually drill these leaders and ask the tough questions. Because right now they're getting off easy. Because here's why. They all want to do the right thing. I believe that in my heart. The problem is the messaging doesn't go down to the worker bees. And most of those want to do the right thing. But there's these bureaucratic mid-level people that need a sledgehammer over their head, and they need to be held accountable. And you do it one time, and then things change. So now, you get that fixed. Now you use these great countries in the Five Eyes. We already have good relationships with Australia, Canada. Hey, look, the best relations we had at SOD was with Colombia. All these multi-jurisdictional cases were because Colombia was sharing evidence. And we have judicial programs all over the world pursuant to the rule of law. So this is not that hard on the law enforcement side. But I agree with many of the statements that were made. This is much bigger than a law enforcement issue. It's like the drug issue, right? Law enforcement will enforce the laws. But it's all this other stuff that requires a full engagement, which we don't have.
David, would you like to say something about what we have learned about those dynamics in the Middle East, about Hezbollah and its operations in the TBA, and if you see any opportunities for either disruption or degrading or managing either the narrative or the community relations? And then after that, I'd like to open it up to the audience.
So the parallels are, I mean, they're almost identical. What you have are even, I don't know where to even start. Down to every social structure that you have in Lebanon, you have a parallel for it in the TBA. I recall even seeing the celebrations, the community celebrations. They're centered around commemorations of resistance anniversaries. The May 25th anniversary of the withdrawal of Israel from South Lebanon is heavily commemorated. One thing we also noticed, or I also noticed, was that the television programs that are played for children in these community centers. There's one particular TV station called Taha TV that Hezbollah runs. It's basically Saturday morning cartoons a la Khomeini. And they have programming with cartoons, they take the stories of the religion, the imams, and Khomeini's doctrine, and package it for children with militaristic anashid, the whole thing. And these kids are watching it in the TBA. So you're seeing this structure, this indoctrination on a slow drip level, that the same thing that's going on in Lebanon is going on in South America. As for disconnecting the two somehow.
Are you hopeful? Are you pessimistic?
I am pessimistic. At the same time, I'm not. I don't say there's not hope. Not the entire community there has been co-opted by Hezbollah. You do have Maronites. You do have non-Shia. You also have the entire Shia community there is not necessarily pro-Hezbollah. There was also a strong Amal party presence. Now, these two parties have a complex history and a complex relationship. Now they're kind of in an alliance, but ideologically and historically, these two are divergent. If somehow you could find a way to wedge the two, that would help. It wouldn't end the support that Hezbollah is getting from those that align with it directly, but it would at least kind of disconnect the communities, create some fissures.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. I mean, we've heard, yes? And please stand up. Be proud. Be proud of who you are and identify yourself. Do we have a microphone, or just project your voice? There you go.
Hi, I'm Chris Martin. I represent the UK administration based in Argentina. Really enthused by Derek's passion. I think we could do more with that in my administration. And I want to turn to the point that you made, José Luís, about having a strategic action plan. The eye-watering thing in this report I see is that illicit market penetration for tobacco in Brazil measured at 40 17 years ago in the UK, we worried ourselves silly because illicit market penetration had reached 25%. We implemented the action plan 17 years ago. Worked hard, it's been a great interagency, cross-government effort, but it's taken us 17 years to half that level of illicit market penetration. So the point I'm making is we're proud of the success we've made, but it's an enormous challenge. And how on earth you reverse illicit market penetration in Brazil and recognise, all of the other economic and social harms associated with that, and the fact that other transnational organised crime is underpinned by the huge profits in that trade.
Right. I'd like to make the point that one of the reasons that you find, and one of the things we found is in Latin America and other parts of the world, you see it in West Africa, that you see a lot of narcotics being found alongside cigarettes, illicit cigarettes, is because Hezbollah has a strong presence in both crimes. So one of the things that's worrying Brazil at the moment is the increased security of threats posed by the PCC and Comando Vermelho, which is Primero Comando Capital is the PCC, and Comando Vermelho is sort of the Red Command, that are huge organized crime groups in Brazil, openly robbing banks in broad daylight, launching grenades at prisons and sort of military assaults, military-style assaults on the prisons, operating with impunity, challenging and winning against the military in the favelas. And that's because they have big weaponry, because they have big money, because their drugs are being shipped by Hezbollah, which is by many other groups. There's lots of corruption, lots of blame to go around, but they act as the DHL or the UPS to, hey, if you want to move something, they've got the network. And that becomes sort of a confluence. And we've seen this pattern over and over again. Please, any other questions of the brains at the table or further comments?
Chris, you asked a very good question. How do we take it from just talk to action? It comes when governments, and I've spent a long time around governments, makes it a priority, makes it a mandate to be a priority, and it has to stop from the top. There are people like Derek who spend a long time out in the field and make a fantastic job, but they need overhead cover, support, resources, task force. We need a multilateral approach, so it's not only when one government identifies it, it's a multilateral approach of the government, and it becomes a priority. What we're talking about is a priority of proceeds of crime, anti-money laundering, terrorist financing, illicit products. What more of a headline do we have? And what we're talking about is not a central fusion centre. So we need a multi-action task force in which governments agree at the political level that it's a priority. They create the task force, they give the tools to the law enforcement people, the people who need it the most to actually go on and do it. Then we also need the outskirts of the international community, like the UN ODC, anti-money laundering. It is their line of where they need. The Financial Action Task Force. These has to come together in a multilateral approach in which we all agree. It then goes on the G20 thing. It goes on the APEC thing. It has to become politicians, you start from the top and it rolls down. It's a very simple thing. So we can talk about it till we come home, and the poor people who are actually in the field, who we saw struggling for intel, for more capacity building, more technology to solve this, because this is solvable. Mm-hmm. I don't know how to say it. It is solvable. And yet we sit here from something since 2005 and we say it's okay. It's not okay anymore. So what we need to do, make it a multilateral issue, a mandate, a priority, and then the good people like Derek and others who are in the field can get on and fix it. End of story.
Yes, I agree with you. In the UK, we've just published the National Security Capability Review. It identifies the fact that there's some great interagency collaboration domestically and internationally. Oddly, I think the thing that we're hamstrung by is the fact that individual agencies' measures of success are not congruent. We each have our own measures. If actually we would say the overarching objective, the thing that collectively we have to do this, then each agency must devise the measures that demonstrate
So can I just address that only because it brings up a point?
Oh, and José Luís also, are you trying to make a comment?
Yeah, but please go ahead.
Okay, so real quick, so in the Obama administration's transnational crime strategy, which was a national emergency, a priority, everything that we've said, they designated what they called at the time the Threat Mitigation Working Group. It's on the White House website, you can read it. And they designated people to be in charge of that group. And the concept was to bring the interagency together to ensure maximum efficiency and prioritization. It's kind of like you're saying. If each individual agency is measured on certain things, then this is never going to be successful because people are going to do their own thing. That's true. But in that case, it's even worse because once we identified the priorities through the interagency, then we couldn't get the agencies to come together. And then no one did anything about it. So I'm sorry, I always forget names. Stuart. In Stuart's response, if the people above then turn around and say, wait a minute, time out. Who's in charge of that threat mitigation working group? Let's bring him in and start grilling him on how this can happen under his leadership. Then you'll see things changing. But they don't ask those questions. And then when President Trump gets on board, he basically signs off on the same type of transnational crime executive order. And I hope in 4 or 5 years we're still not talking about it. So until somebody starts hitting them hard with the questions about the results and the accountability. So in that Project Cassandra, we actually had about 300 businesses in our country sending used cars to West Africa to sell to support Hezbollah, a global terrorist group. But we couldn't get the interagency to provide that information, so we only hit 30 businesses. So 270 were left out there running around in our country. Then you read all these potential sleeper cell reports. Well, maybe some of those businesses will be sleeper cells if Iran and Israel start going at it. But they're right here in our country. So until the tough questions, Stuart, I'm sorry, I remember your name this time. See, I'm bad at names. Remember that time at the FDD event? Same thing. So you got to have people above holding people accountable. We always talk about accountability, but there is none. Sorry.
José Luís.
Thanks.
Chime in on the solution.
Thank you, Vanessa. No, so to Chris' question, I think you raised two matters. One, these are long-term projects. Two, it's very difficult to have consistent information, statistics, data, so on. On the first point, yes, definitely these are very long-term projects, but that's why they have to be conceived with components that include immediate actions, and that's where the tactical side comes. But that tactical has to be informed eventually as the work progresses with the more strategic vision and the more informed vision. If we don't start today, we'll never be in year 17, so it's better to start now. And second, on the statistics, that's one of the main advantages of carrying out a national risk assessment, that it obliges authorities to start talking among each other, to start sharing information, and to start agreeing on which are the statistics and the information that they will take into account.
We can do this.
We can do this. Any other questions? Please, be bold. We've got a brave panel over here.
Got Derek in front of me.
Yeah, no wallflowers at this panel, so no? Eric, yeah?
Oh, if there's no questions, I would like to make a comment.
Yes, please do.
I think, again, the report is great, and perhaps one area where it would be, it could be strengthened is in understanding which is the current situation on the institutional framework, the legal framework in these countries nowadays. So the FATF has made an amazing job in pushing countries all over the world in adopting which are considered the international standards. And most countries, including these three, the TBA countries, have amended their legislations over the past years. So I wouldn't say the main issue in the region is a matter of legislation. There has also been growing expertise in these countries. I know many of the high-level public servants of these three countries dedicated to these topics, and they're very knowledgeable people in this matter. So again, I think the focus is on the political will. These people, these public servants, need the support at the president level, which should be translated not only in human resources, but in economic, material, and financial resources. The question is how they're going to get to that point. Well, there is where international pressure can have a very important role, where this type of reports, where having discussion in the US Congress is key. As long as this is not an issue in the international discussion, in the international radar, I don't think it will be addressed as it needs to be addressed. Thanks.
So, great. So, so you think that this may be what we've done here today might perhaps be a launch pad for raising awareness and helping to build the will to tackle this? Are you hopeful?
No, definitely.
Always looking for optimism.
That is key, Vanessa, because if we don't have these discussions, the topic will not be in the radar of the right people, neither here nor in the TVA countries. This has to be an issue that is discussed internationally because of the repercussion it has, not only for those countries directly, but also for any country basically in the world, as the crime is related also to terrorist financing, and terrorism obviously can happen anywhere. So this has to be an international demand, and it's not that the TVA countries are not addressing this issue, it's just that they're not working coordinatedly enough, and they're not taking as much action as they have to. So I think they have the capacity, there just has to be the right incentives for that purpose.
Anything else? Any other questions, observations? Derek?
I'd like to say something, only because it's kind of like a closing thought, just because, like, you know, I went to college, I never consider myself like a genius or whatever, like these guys on the panel, but, or my friend EO over there, because that guy is smart. But can you guys do me a favor and just ask this question to whoever you can ask it to? If everyone is saying how terrorists are tapping into the criminal networks for their funding, why is our system in the US still broken? Why? I can't accept that, I'm sorry. And what I mean by that is we have our JTTFs, which do tremendous work. So if you're a criminal investigator, everybody's trained that the criminal investigator must coordinate with the JTTFs when you have any information on terrorism. So if I'm working a drug case and the guy says, hey, I want to blow up the Sears Tower tomorrow, immediately you're going to notify the JTTF, and the FBI and the intel community are going to do a good job and investigate that. That's not a problem. 99 point, and that's what happened in the Quds Force case. The DEA went right to the FBI. FBI did a great job, and they took down that guy. But in reverse, it's a disaster. So you're working a terror inquiry. You check the box of this guy's not a terrorism, and you don't tap into the resources of the law enforcement, criminal investigators, and the intelligence. So the person is left out there to do the bombing and do the killings instead of trying to take them down on the criminal side. So just ask yourself the question, how can a country be like the US be so smart and so advanced, but that basic principle we can't fix? Why? I don't know the answer. I really don't. If you study all of these cases, it's too secret, we can't pass it to the state and locals, it's too secret, this guy's not cleared. That's a bunch of BS, because we're in this together, and our country's going to get destroyed if we don't start sharing the information, and people have to be held accountable. So that's my closing thoughts on the point.
Stuart wants a counter.
No.
Stuart?
I could never be like Derek, who's running for Congress, by the way. Surprise, surprise. No. Look, I'll give you a very good story. Over 15 years ago, I came to DC. There's a whole group of us from the Five Eyes. Everybody knows the Five Eyes. It's one of the longest intelligence sharing communities in the world. It's one of the strongest. Canada, Australia, United Kingdom, New Zealand, and the US. We sat around in this place not too far out from the DC hub here. We had a whole heap of experts. We sat around the world. We're talking about a problem. And we're trying to work out what it is. There was a whole heap of experts. Some of us said, this is not a problem to worry about. Others said, no, we'll think about it another time. Some said, no, this is going to be a global problem. So we sat around there, and we started out with this term called electronic warfare. That's what it was. It was, you know, something's happening. It was the role of the Department of Defense at the time, and we're all trying to work out what it is. Some people had a few problems here on their computers here and there. And in that room, we said, some will work on it, some won't. It's not a priority. Today, that word is called cyber. It took us a long time to wake up to this problem. And now it's a global problem. So what I'm saying is, we have this problem that's been identified. Let's cut down the time frame to make it happen, As Chris said, they worked hard for 17 years. Let's get Derek out in the field. So
yeah, we're putting Derek on a
plane
plane
now and get it working. So sometimes when we talk about little things and we don't understand it, but this is a multilateral problem. This is not one country, one organization. This is a multilateral problem on a global problem that nobody in the blockchain of crime and terrorism, everybody's involved. We just all got to come together and take the little blocks out to dismantle this blockchain of crime. So take it from a lawyer. This is not a criticism of anyone. This is just we've all got this problem and we just need to help and assist. So let's move forward from today and make it happen, because I'm not coming back here to say, I told you so.
What? What if I invite you? Okay. On that note, if we don't have any more questions, I invite you to have coffee and donuts. We have oodles of munchkins and things over there. Or come and approach us one by one, ask us tough off-the-question record. And Eric Farnsworth, I want to point him out, the VP of Council of the Americas, an organization I greatly admire for their courage in all things Western Hemisphere. Another idol of mine. There are so many of them in this room. Anyway, thank you very much for coming, and we hope to hear from you. We'll welcome angry emails as well. That's fine. Thank you very much.